wish we could have live discussion with everyone, but there's just too many of us to make that happen. So the chat feature is active today. You'll note that Retta has been chatting with you. If you don't know how to run the chat feature, look on Zoom up across the bottom. There should be some little call out bubbles. Hit chat. It should appear on the right side of your screen. You can chat to everyone, or you can also choose specific speakers. If you've got a general question, we'd encourage you to put in the everyone chat so all the other participants today can see what you're asking and know exactly what our speakers are answering today. Note that Retta has also put in her email address and her phone number. If you have any issues today with IT or you've dropped us for some reason, let Retta know. Send her a quick note and she will try to do her best to get you back on there. So you notice it's on the screen here, but we've also put that in the chat for your convenience. Most of the talks that we're going to have today are focused for West Slope producers, but we also note that we have a number of people from the Front Range and the Eastern Slope. We welcome you today, but note that especially the research that Hunter is going to be talking about, some of the weather items that we're talking about are going to be more specific to the West Slope, but we're glad you're here, and we hope that you learn about some of the issues and considerations that we deal with on our side of the hill. If you do need a closed caption uh, version of today's presentation, please let Retta know, and she will make sure to get you a copy of that. We want to make sure that we are serving all of the clients, not only in Western Colorado and the United States. So if you have any issues with the way we've presented any information, you can't understand it, please let us know. Again, Retta will be the contact for that. And here that is in Spanish. And I will pause a moment if we have any Spanish speakers on the call today for them to read that and to understand how they can get a translation of the presentations today available for them in their language. And if you speak any other language that we are not offering today, please let us know that as well. And we will do our best to get that translated for you. If the internet should go down or we have some sort of issue that something pops up that we're not aware of, what we're going to do is log out of this Zoom presentation as quickly as possible and then use that same registration list that gave you the link for you to join us this morning. We'll send out a new link for you and we'll have you hop on. Know that it'll take a few minutes for that to all happen. So look to your email. If we should drop this call entirely, look to your email for a new link and join us on the new link. Want to take a quick moment to thank all the people that helped put this together. The Livestock and Forage Growers update has been a program that we've been putting on online for a few years now. It takes a group to do it. Most of all, we want to thank our speakers for coming on this year. We always mix it up a bit and try to do subject matter that is always timely and interesting for our producers, and we hope you will find it that way as well this year. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to turn over to my friend and colleague, Megan Stetson, who is the Extension Director in Moffat County. And Megan, we look forward to you leading us through to our next speaker.
Thank you, Todd. Yes, I'm Megan Stetson, the Extension Director in Moffat County. Our first speaker today is Dr. Becky Bollinger. She will be giving us the weather and climate update for today. Becky, if you could please go ahead and start to share your presentation. She will start off with current weather conditions, the accumulation of seasonal snowpack, and what's expected for peak snowpack. Then she'll discuss what's typical for summers and what might be possible for this summer. Dr. Bollinger is a senior client and water resource scientist for Linker. She previously worked at the Colorado Climate Center at CSU and two other climate centers. Her interests include climate variability, climate trends, climate prediction, the hydrologic cycle, water resources, and climate and drought monitoring. Her expertise and passion is with bridging the gap between climate research and decision-making applications. So Dr. Bollinger, if you're ready, I'll let you go ahead and take over.
Thank you so much, Megan. And I firstly want to apologize for my voice. I've been fighting a cold this week, so I may need to briefly mute and cough at some point, but I will do my best to get through this without interruption. I really want to thank Todd and Retta for inviting me to do this. A year ago, I was the assistant state climatologist with the Colorado Climate Center at CSU. I have since transition positions. I am still in Colorado and still doing a lot with Colorado's climate. And I look forward to being able to maintain these connections and talk with you today. So, just a brief outline, we're going to kind of talk about what we've had for the water year so far, beginning October 1st, going through now, and where we currently stand. And then what does it look like is going to happen from here, particularly as we go through spring and then into the summer. I'll provide some key takeaways and resources that you may find helpful for the future. So start with our current conditions, looking back at the beginning of the water year. So from October through the end of February, these maps just came out from the Colorado Climate Center this week. On the left, we're looking at a map of temperature rankings for the entire state of Colorado for that October through February time period. So where you have pinks and reds are areas that show higher ranking warmer conditions, and where you see blues, which you do not see on this map, would be cooler ranked years out of that 130-year record. So most of the state has experienced a warmer October through February, especially as we look down towards the San Luis Valley and across the West Slope, where we see ranking in the top 10 warmest for that time period. Statewide rank is 21st warmest out of the 130 years. On the right is the ranking for precipitation for the same time period. We're ranked right around the middle, 68th driest or 63rd wettest, whichever way, if you're optimist or pessimist, the way you want to look at it. Where you see the browns, which would be in the northwest corner of the state, along the Grand Mesa and down towards the San Juan Mountains. That's where we're seeing some of the drier ranked areas. And then where we see the greens, different shades of greens, are where it has been wetter for this time period, especially looking along the southeastern plains, a little bit into the San Luis Valley towards the Sangre de Cristos, where we've seen top 20 or top 10 ranked wettest October through February for this year. Now, if we change the time period, it's interesting how the story changes. So on the left, we have our temperature ranking, but now I'm just looking at January and February. So once we drop off October, November, and December, which were extremely warm, we actually see a shift in our temperature rankings. And all along the Eastern Plains, we see a cooler ranking in temperature, which really signifies that it was the October, November, December time period that were driving a lot of those warmer temperatures. We still see warm temperature rankings in southern Colorado and western Colorado, but not quite as warm. So really, a bulk of that extreme warmth came from the 2024 portion of the water year. On the map on the right, I am looking at the precipitation rankings just for our winter months. So that would be December, January, and February. Once we drop out October and November, those wet rankings that we saw in southern Colorado and southeast Colorado disappears. So they had a pretty major event early on in the water year that does not show up when you look at the winter. So basically, I would say the memory from that wet time period is pretty much gone if you look at conditions now. On the west slope, all of western Colorado shows up much drier, with a couple of areas around Montrose County and Delta County and down towards Mineral and Hinsdale with their record driest winter out of those 130 years. So a very different situation depending on how you look at it. So this map shows the precipitation so far that's accumulated in March. This only goes through March 10th, which was Monday. And what we see is that the mountain precipitation for the first 10 days has hovered between 1/2 inch and 1.5 inches. This can be close to average to maybe slightly above average for some of these areas. Once we get east of the Continental Divide and into those lower elevations, there is some spots that have no precipitation or precipitation between a tenth of an inch to a quarter of an inch. Further on the west slope, closer to the Utah border, we also see a quarter of an inch to half an inch. Our current snowpack across the basins shows that our northern basins are performing a lot better than our southern basins are doing. So each basin, we're looking at snowpack, which is the amount of water that's stored in the snow at each of these individual stations averaged over a basin. And what is the snowpack on March 10th compared to all the March 10ths for these snowpack records? So for the Yampa White, the North Platte, the South Platte, and the Colorado headwaters, we're seeing mostly near normal snowpack for this time of year. As we get into those central mountains, particularly in the Gunnison Basin and the Arkansas Basin, it's a little bit lower, but between that 70 to 90% of average snowpack. And then as we move further south for the Rio Grande Basin and the San Miguel, Dolores, San Juan Basin, we're seeing below normal, below that 70% of average mark for snowpack conditions. This is our current depiction of drought according to the U.S. Drought Monitor right now. So where you see white in the state, there is currently no drought or dry conditions. So that takes up most of the eastern plains, a little bit into the northern mountains, around the Steamboat area, around the Colorado headwaters, around the Arkansas headwaters, with a couple of dry conditions showing up in the southeast corner of the state along the Sangre de Cristos and up in northern Colorado where Larimer and Weld meet. On the western side, as we get further downstream on the Colorado River, around the lower Gunnison River, Dolores River, San Miguel, and into the Rio Grande, we're starting to see more dry conditions with D1 being the peach color and D2, which is severe drought, being that orange color. So currently we have almost 8% of our state is in D2 or D3 drought. This map shows what the changes in the drought monitor have been since the beginning of the water year. So if we compare today's drought monitor to the drought monitor map that came out on October 1st, where we see greens are areas that are much improved. So the greens go kind of on a diagonal from the northwest part of the state to the southeast part of the state, where we've seen a lot of improvement, particularly over the Front Range urban corridor, which was showing a lot of D2 conditions at the beginning of the water year and now has no drought. Same for the Eastern Plains. We've seen a couple of category improvements to no drought. However, when you look at Western Colorado and Southwestern Colorado, that's where we've seen all of our degradations. That's where we've had areas that were not in drought or were just abnormally dry have increased to moderate drought and severe drought, and a couple of areas that have gone into that D3 extreme drought. All right, so let's shift over to the outlook and where we're going from here. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about what we're going to see over the next few days. So I brought up this map showing what the 72-hour snowfall forecast is. So that would include from today through Saturday morning. Now, most of this is actually going to fall on Friday. But you can see as we've got, you might have heard about this powerful low pressure system that's moving across the area. It's going to bring some mountain moisture And in terms of snowfall accumulations, if we're looking at the northern and central mountains, you can probably expect between 5 to 8 inches of snow. And then as you move further south into the San Juan Mountains, we're looking at closer to 10 to 13 inches of snow. So probably not one of our biggest snowmakers, but still a decent boost for March coming towards the end of the cold season. If you go east of the divide, unfortunately, this will not really bring us snow. It's going to bring us a lot of wind. And so, pretty much everywhere east of divide, you might get a couple flurries, but mostly it's just going to be the wind making all of us miserable. So this is the precipitation that is for the entire week. So we start from this morning and go through next Wednesday morning, what our total precipitation accumulations will be. Now, the significant chunk of what happens on Friday is basically what we're seeing for the western part of the state on this map, where our higher elevations and into the lower elevations on the west side of the state are going to get between 3/4 to 2 inches of precipitation. Lower elevations may be closer to 1/2 inch of precipitation. As we move east of the divide and across the eastern plains and through the San Luis Valley, we're going to see those lower accumulations, mostly less than 1/2 of an inch. This is the Climate Prediction Center 8 to 14 day outlook. So this one was released yesterday, and we're looking at the middle of March, March 19th through 25th. And the map on the left for the entire country shows the temperature outlook. So where you see the blues are areas that it is more likely to be below average temperatures, and where you see reds, it is more likely to be above average temperatures. So the southwestern portion of the United States is leaning towards below average temperatures, and that creeps up over the Four Corners and through western Colorado. Um, but it's just a slight leaning towards that below average temperature, with closer to normal temperatures expected for the central and eastern part of the state. On the right, we're looking at the precipitation outlook for the same time period. So where you see the greens are areas where it's leaning towards above average precipitation. Where we see the best chances for above average precipitation are over the Pacific Northwest and over the Great Lakes region. Over Colorado, it shows that green, the lightest green color, which really means a very slight leaning towards above average precipitation, but it's also likely that it could be near or below average. So I wouldn't take much stock in that green right there. When we shift out and look more at that seasonal outlook, so this was released late in February, the seasonal temperature and precipitation outlook for March, April, and May. Again, on the left, the temperature, the red is where we expect above average temperatures for the spring. And that is most red along the Gulf Coast states and into the Southwest. That does creep up a little bit over the Four Corners. I would expect that to have an impact on the San Juan Mountains and could likely mean faster snowpack melting. The blue is where areas are expected to be colder than average, which mostly shows up over the northwest part of the country, particularly over Washington, Montana. And equal chances is the white, which covers most of the northeastern part of Colorado. And that is basically where they're uncertain about what the temperature pattern is going to be. On the right is the precipitation outlook. This is similar to the 8 to 14 day for the above average precipitation, where we see wetter conditions more likely for the Pacific Northwest and the Great Lakes area. Over the Southwest, it's an increased likelihood for below average conditions. And we have more likely below, really bullseye showing up over the Four Corners region and extending into Southwest Colorado. So really, this is looking at there is more confidence that most of Colorado is going to have a dry spring. So how is this connected to La Nina? Well, I will tell you, going back to that previous map, that does follow a La Nina pattern where we expect that the Pacific Northwest and Great Lakes would be wetter and the Southwest would be drier. And that is what we typically see during a La Nina. So right now we are in a weak La Nina. So we have these forecasts from the Climate Prediction Center that shows what is likely over the next 3 month running time periods. So we are currently in the La Nina, which is the blue bar. As we move forward through the seasons, so if you go to the MAM, that would be March, April, May. The chance of still being in a La Nina is about 35%, and the gray is about 65% that we will be in neutral conditions. So as we move through the spring and into summer, the most likely conditions will be neutral, which means that La Nina will continue to weak and will be replaced by neutral conditions. What neutral conditions means is that the tropical Pacific Ocean off the coast of South America does not show those warm anomalies like you would see with an El Nino or the cold anomalies like you would see with a La Nina. And so it doesn't really tell us a lot about what we can expect in the summer. As we go into the late summer and towards the fall, the likelihood of that neutral conditions weakens. And right now, I would say it's pretty much a dice roll. What do you expect to happen in the fall if we're going to stay in neutral or go into La Nina or go into an El Nino? So I would say at this point, it's really too soon to tell, and we don't know what to expect at this time. But let's look at our snowpack and see short term, what are we expecting to happen over the next few weeks, couple of months. So basically, it's where you see the best snowpack conditions. It's going to be a better story, and where it's not so good, it's not going to be as good of a story. So I picked an example of the Colorado headwaters. So this takes 31 snowtell sites for the Colorado headwaters region and looks at their snowpack. The black line shows where the current snowpack has accumulated and is as of March 12th at midnight. So the black line right now, March 12th, shows that we're right about average. We're about 99% of median for the current snowpack, which shows up just around, I think, 13 and a half to 14 inches, which is normal. And then each of these dash lines shows from the historical record of snowpack at these sites what is possible to happen from this point on. And since we're right near average, it's pretty much what you would expect. If you have average snowpack, you'll end up with about average peak snowpack. If you get above average snowpack, it'll be above average. And if you get less than average, it's going to be less than average. So you can expect that we're going to see a bump, a little bit of a bump in the next few days. That might keep us near average to slightly above average. But if we do have a dry spring, it's more likely to follow maybe that green or that yellow line and end up peaking very slightly below average. I would think we'll see better conditions to the north for the Yampa Basin and the North Platte Basin. So they are more likely to hit near average, maybe slightly above average. But conditions are not so bad here. We're only 32 days away from the normal peak for the Colorado headwaters. So we're coming up close to that peak time period. Shifting south, I'm looking at the San Juan Basin, which is one of our worst basins, unfortunately. The Rio Grande's probably going to look pretty similar. So our current black line, right as up to today, March 12th, is currently at 68% of the median. And that takes it down to the 11th percentile ranking, which really means if you had 100 years of snowpack amounts at March 12th for the San Juan Basin, this would be in the bottom 10th percent or 11th percent driest, and like 90 years would be higher snowpack at this time period. So, unfortunately, very low snowpack. Even if we were to have a really good end to the season, and if you follow that like dark blue line, that would be the max projection. So the wettest snowpack that we've had in the history at San Juan's, we would peak at about average with that. And that's very unlikely, especially given the spring forecast. We can expect much below average peak conditions, especially since we're only 3 weeks away. And the water supply forecast from the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center really shows this, where we've got near average water supply forecast with those yellow and green triangles to the north. Some not as great to the north, but where we see the worst water supply forecast for this spring as you go further south. I won't spend a lot of time on this summary since I'm running out of time, but basically, we have seen worsening drought conditions over western Colorado, and that has been consistent with what we would expect in a La Nina. It doesn't look like after this week's event that we're going to get much more help for the southwest portion of our state. And the summer right now is pretty hard to predict. So unfortunately, I don't have much to say about that, but we will probably have worsening drought in southwest Colorado. These are the links when you go to visit this presentation that I used. If you want that stream flow forecast from the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center, you can visit their site next Wednesday. They'll have an update webinar, and that's all I have for you.
Thank you, Becky. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. And if not, we will move on to our next presentation. Dr. Bollinger, if you could stop sharing, and Dr. Cousins, if you would start sharing your presentation, we will keep moving forward. So Dr. Cousins is Dr. Tyler Cousins is our next speaker. He is the director in ag economics, sorry, at the Livestock Marketing Information Center. He has been with the center since 2019, providing economic analysis for the livestock and feed sectors. Previously, Tyler worked as an agricultural economist at the United States Department of Ag's Foreign Ag Service in Washington, D.C., where he provided situation and outlook economic analysis on U.S. and global livestock production and trade. Dr. Cousins also worked for the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service Wildlife Services National Wildlife Research Center, evaluating animal disease prevalence in U.S. food animal populations and unregulated wildlife populations. Dr. Cousins received his PhD in ag economics from Colorado State University, where his research focused on the economics of animal health. He will provide an outlook update on livestock and crops grown in Colorado, specifically cattle, corn, hay, and other forage crops related to livestock production. So Dr. Cousins, if you're ready, I'll let you take over.
All right, thank you, Megan. And hopefully you can see my slides, and we'll get going here. So give some discussion here on the kind of forage and specifically more on the cattle side of things. So I guess first off, what I want to talk about is LMIC, who we are and what we do. So kind of our main mission statement there that you can see at the top of the slide, we provide timely and comprehensive livestock marketing resources through cooperation. So we technically are housed under Colorado State University's extension services, but we do have a little bit more of a national scope as far as our objective here at LMIC. So you can see here the graphic of the U.S., the land grant universities that we work with. That's our primary mission, is to support their efforts, their extension efforts, and their research and just the support and information that they give to their producers and their stakeholders. So a lot of that is just a lot of data analysis and capture. Also do provide just a lot of forecasting work, and some of that discussion will be provided here in this talk. Here you can also see we work with a host of associate members, a couple of those to name: National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Farm Bureau, Pork Board, Pork Producers Council, Sheep Industry Association, to name a few of those. We also do work with 8 USDA agencies, and so you can see a list of those that we work with. Most of the major USDA agencies also are a part of what we do and support the efforts that we do there. So with that, keep moving forward. Pretty quick outline here of things I want to discuss. I want to start off with a little bit bigger picture discussion on the economy side of things, some of those larger factors that are at play in the economy and how those kind of shape up to just overall demand in the economy, just demand for goods. But then moving forward, just drilling down a little bit more to some discussion on the forage and crop side of things. Specifically looking at kind of more on the hay and the corn side of things as it relates to the livestock sector. And then I'll move into some discussion in cattle and beef outlook and provide more of the perspective on that side of things. So with that, get started here kind of on the economy side of things. This morning we actually had the consumer price index updated this morning. Saw a little bit of a decline in the overall inflationary picture there. Just below 3%, I believe, is about 2.8% increase in just overall CPI. But you can see here, I have it actually mapped out with all goods, the CPI for all goods, but also the core CPI. So core CPI, you can see there excludes food and energy, kind of excludes some of those maybe a little bit more volatile goods in the economy there. But you can see by and large, through a good portion of 24 and as we've started 25, kind of the overall percentage change, annual percentage change on a monthly basis is tracking about that 2.5% to 3%. Obviously, you see kind of get back before pandemic timeframe there, kind of that 2011 to just before 2020, kind of tracking around that 2% area there. So that's kind of that goal that they're trying to get to. But I would say by and large, we're tracking pretty close on trending that way. So as far as inflationary pressures go, definitely an improvement of where we were 2 to 3 years ago. We're above 4 to over 8% in some cases there. So definitely improvement on the just overall inflationary pressure side of things, but still some lingering effects of that in the economy. And so one of the things I've been kind of using in some of my talks here is just this comes out of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And so it's non-housing debt balance. And so the biggest one I want you to focus on there is that orange section. That is actually credit card debt. And so, that's actually we ended 2024, they were reporting that is actually just over $2.1 trillion. So it's actually the record highest as far as credit card debt goes. And so you can see that margin there over the last 10 years or so is definitely starting to widen. And so it's definitely one of those that you look at as far as just from a larger economy standpoint of, consumers, are they putting more purchases on that credit card? What purchases are they putting on that? And are they able to repay that credit card at the end of the month? Right. And I would argue some of this stems from just the overall inflation that we saw a couple of years ago, just as we saw in the prior graph there. Just some of the consumers kind of putting some things on a credit card to maybe kind of get through a little bit of a tough time. But hopefully, you see them be able to pay that debt down and still maintain some of their purchasing power on a larger scale there. So just kind of one of those things, bigger picture things that look at, and I find kind of interesting there. Obviously, there's a few other things that could be discussed in this graph, auto loans and student loans. But I think the biggest thing I wanted to focus on was just that credit card side of things. Just the overall purchasing power of the consumer to buy just overall goods and keep spurring on the economy. Another thing that I like to look at, kind of drilling down a little bit more to maybe the agricultural livestock producer side of things, looking here at just overall interest rates. So you can see the green line is actually the Fed fund rate that they publish And so you can see that it's definitely increased. That over that 5% over the last few months here, it started to move a little bit lower. But the biggest thing I want to point out here is the blue and red lines there. So we're looking at variable interest rates from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City and Dallas. So I have two different kind of variable interest rates there. One is for feeder cattle that comes from Dallas, and the other one is an operating loan comes from Kansas City. Biggest thing I want to point out here, you can see that those are definitely follow a similar trend to what the Fed fund rate is reporting. And so the thing I want to point out is we're sitting at a variable interest rate for these operating loans or feeder cattle, purchase of feeder cattle, that is about 9%, just above 8%. And so we compare that to roughly a decade ago. You can see that that's a 3 to 4 percentage point increase. And so why I referenced that decade ago is that's kind of that last time on the cattle side of things where we saw some significant herd rebuilding efforts. And we're kind of at that similar phase in the cattle cycle here. And we'll get into a little bit more of this discussion. But I want to at least draw your attention to just the overall cost of doing business from a producer level. That borrowing capital from a bank is higher than it was a decade ago. And so definitely a headwind to just overall the overall ability of the producer to start expanding their operation if they want to, or just borrow capital. And so this isn't something that is unique to just the agricultural industry or livestock sector. I mean, this goes across the economy as a whole, correct? Because the interest rate is kind of one of those levers that's pretty easy for to use to throttle the economy. And so definitely we're seeing some of that occur. And so just to kind of draw that to your attention as far as a bigger picture item that is going on. So let's move into some of this discussion on the kind of forage and crop side of things. Starting off here with some discussion on just all hay stocks, looking at U.S. total all hay stocks, and specifically we're looking at the December 1 hay stocks. So we get two reports of when hay stocks come out. It's actually December 1 and May 1 are those two data points that we get throughout the year. So it's December 1, kind of think of this as that hay that was produced in 2024. It's been stockpiled. Now it's being fed kind of through those winter months and into the spring before we start getting our first cuttings here in the new marketing year for the hay side of things. And you can see that in those blue lines or blue charts there. The last 2 to 3 years, we've been on an upward trend as far as stocks go. So definitely seeing a little bit more production on that side of things. And as we look at those prices, red line is actually the national or U.S. all hay price. And so I've graphed that and overlaid that with the Colorado hay price, which is that green line there. So you can see kind of how those relationships work. And so if we look at this from a strictly economic standpoint, supply and demand, right? Supply has been increasing over these last 2 years to 3 years. All else equal, meaning demand has not changed. That means prices are moving lower. And so we've definitely seen that trend happen. And so I've marked out sort of there my 25 expectations as far as price goes there based on what we know as far as December 1 hay stocks, that relationship. Definitely seeing price expectation looking to be a little bit lower than what we saw in 2024 on a national basis there. So I would venture to guess that Colorado prices will definitely move lower here in this next as we get farther into 2025, just as we see kind of that supply picture still hold pretty strong. Now, kind of overlaying some of this discussion that was in the prior section here on just the overall drought picture and dryness. This is a map that comes out of USDA's World Agricultural Outlook Board. And they publish this once a week, and all they really do is just overlay the drought monitor map onto major crop and livestock producing regions of the U.S. So you can see here, this is the major hay areas that are in drought. So they've just overlaid that drought picture on those major hay areas. And in the bottom left, you can see that approximately 37% of the hay acreage is within an area experiencing drought. Okay, and so we focus in here a little bit more on Colorado. You can see that kind of north central part of the state. There's some of that hay area that is under drought, but then we look at some of that western and southwest part of Colorado. A larger portion of the state there is under that drought area, and definitely a drier picture there, potentially some impacts to just overall hay production and hay supplies potentially as we get into 2025. Obviously, this is a little bit more short-term picture as we look at the drought. So as we get more into the growing season, definitely could see some things change here. But as far as where things currently sit, kind of gives you an idea as just overall potential impacts that we might be seeing as we get farther into the growing season here. Now, switching over to some corn discussion here, sort of a similar graphic here. We have total production here in the blue bars. And so USDA announced a couple of weeks ago at the Ag Outlook Forum that they're expecting 94 million acres of corn to be planted here in this upcoming crop year. Definitely one of those higher years as far as overall hay or corn acres to be planted. And you consider sort of a trend line yield growth expectation there definitely points towards higher overall corn supplies in 2025. So definitely that is weighing on prices. And as you can see in the blue bars, we've had a couple of years of good overall corn production. And so we've seen this price move from over $6 in 2022 to down to almost $4 potentially. Here's the expectation for 2025. As the red line shows there. Overlaid the green line, just to give you an idea of what Colorado corn prices are looking like in comparison to the national price. So definitely a little bit stronger price over the last few years for Colorado as it relates to the national price. But definitely trending lower here. And so you kind of think about this overall feed cost side of things definitely bodes well for those livestock producers to keep sort of their input costs lower than what they had seen, even 2 to 3 years ago. So definitely a little bit more positive picture there, just on the cost side of things for these livestock producers. Now, as we kind of look at just overall market expectations for prices, so kind of looking here at that blue line, current 2025 prices on a weekly basis, and we're looking here at Omaha corn prices because that's kind of that representative corn price from a national perspective here. Definitely lower than what the 5-year average has been, that red line there, but compared to a year ago, we're tracking slightly better to even with where we were a year ago. But I've overlaid the 2025 futures prices, and these are the closing price as of yesterday, March 11th. And so you can see that the overall market expectation for corn prices moving forward in 2025 is looking to be about that $4.50 to maybe $5 mark. As it current sits right now. Now, obviously, we haven't started rolling and putting corn in the ground, started planting. So there's a lot of things to be determined as far as overall corn supplies moving forward. So definitely some changes can occur to this price. But I think as far as where the market sits right now, their expectation is kind of that $4.50 to $5 mark. Definitely, painting a picture of overall lower input costs for the livestock producer. Similar graphic here, overlaying drought with the major corn producing areas, right? So we kind of, we see kind of northeast Colorado and parts of eastern Colorado, some of those in some of that drought area. But I think if we look at the more major corn belt areas of the U.S., definitely seeing some of those areas in drought, kind of that good portion of Iowa, southern Minnesota, and even as we get into Illinois and Indiana. So definitely one of those things that we're watching. If we see, the 94 million acres to be planted, we continue to see some of this drought occur, maybe we'll see that yield potential decline a little bit than maybe some of the current expectations. And that would definitely point towards potential increase in prices. But as I noticed, still a lot of the growing season yet ahead to determine how things are really going to shake out from a price point side of things. So moving into some of the cattle discussion here and kind of the outlook, I want to start off just real quick. January 31st, we got our annual inventory numbers from USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. Biggest thing I want to point out here, the red arrows are the kind of those 3 areas that we watch pretty closely here, right? From just an overall supply picture, just the overall beef cows and beef cow replacements. I can see those actually were still down from a year ago, just less than 1%, but still below a year ago. Right. So we're watching those kind of two key categories as those give us kind of our indication as overall expectations of supplies moving forward. So seeing those down from a year ago still kind of paints a picture that supplies are going to be tight as we move through 2025. Now, as we get through some more of this discussion here, are there some economic incentives for these producers to potentially start rebuilding? I think a lot of those are in place, but we still have to keep in mind, the overall interest rate side of things and how that influences the overall decision making of the producer. But by and large, still seeing tighter supplies as just along the cattle side of things. Calf crop was actually a little bit better than expectation. It's down a tenth of a percent. There definitely points to a picture of there's some producers out there, maybe some of those smaller producers that have started to actively get a little bit more aggressive about rebuilding their herds. But still, calf crop down slightly from a year ago, still points towards that tighter supplies as we move through 2025. But as we get farther into the year, a lot of the expectations that analysts will be looking for is to potentially see that change in overall inventory levels, and when we see an increase as we hit January 1, 2026. I think a lot of the picture is painting a little bit more towards that, but I think the increase as we get through this year and move into 2026, that increase is going to be very modest. I think this is going to be a very measured approach as far as the rebuilding efforts go on the cattle side of things. So just a little bit different graphical way of looking at inventories as they relate to prices. So you can see the gray bars there, just overall cattle inventory, total cattle inventory. And so you can see that we're definitely hitting that low point here as we started 2025, lowest since 1951. So definitely a tight cattle supplies there, but similar discussion, economics, supply and demand, assuming demand holds constant and supply goes down, that means prices should move higher. And that's the expectation that we have. So I've penciled out my expectations for those 5 to 6, 7 to 8 weights and fed steer prices. So you can see those are definitely higher than where we were for 2024. So that's kind of my expectations there, just based largely on those tighter supplies that were reported a couple of months ago. So definitely stronger prices there and pointing towards a stronger economic picture for the producers moving forward. And just kind of overlaying the drought picture on where kind of those major cattle producing areas are. So you can see the northern plains there, definitely a good portion of that experienced some drought. A lot of cattle in those regions of the U.S. Southern plains always kind of experienced some of that drought, impacting maybe some of those pasture areas there. Definitely, drought is overlaying a good portion of cattle producing areas of the U.S. But on the cattle or the Colorado side of things, kind of a good portion of those areas are under drought as well. Northern part of the state and also west and southwest parts, definitely impacting some of those areas as far as cattle production goes. Now, one of the things that we do here at LMIC is put together some estimated cow-calf returns. So keep in mind, this is actually kind of based for more of a southern plains. So kind of think of this like southeastern Colorado, southern part of Kansas, Oklahoma, panhandle of Texas, kind of that area is where we're thinking here. So I think it definitely relates to a good portion of Colorado as well, though. But cow-calf returns definitely stronger in 2024, second highest on record. But 2025 is looking to be much stronger there. A lot of that is just driven by stronger prices due to tighter supplies. So as far as the return goes for these cow-calf producers, definitely painting a stronger picture. But I think we have to keep in mind they're coming off the heels of some pretty tough years there in 2019, 2021. And so, kind of rebuilding some of those cash reserves. I think a lot of producers are still kind of in that area there. And so, I think as a lot of those get built up, we'll see producers have the flexibility to make a little bit more decisions from a production standpoint and start to move into more of a rebuilding phase as far as the herd goes. Now, one of the things I've been talking about here, a few of my presentations I've given is actually a tool that comes out of Colorado State University's ag business management extension arm there, and it's actually a spreadsheet that can be used and tailored to your specific operation. And specifically, what we're looking at here is if you wanted to start rebuilding, and say you were going to go buy some bred cows or bred heifers, what can you afford to pay for those? And so, a lot of this hinges on just the overall parameters that you put in there, your herd size, your price expectations, how long do you expect to hold them, and just the overall coal cow values, and a lot of those parameters there obviously factor into this. But I think by and large, it's still a good tool that a producer could use to run through a host of scenarios to figure out, is now a good time to look at rebuilding my herd? And so I've kind of put in some parameters there of just sort of my overall hypothetical expectations. And a lot of that hinges on the outlook for calf prices. And so you can see that they're kind of in the top right of the screen. And a lot of that, that's a fairly positive price outlook, I would argue. I think if you want to be a little bit more conservative, you could take, 30 to 50 cents off some of those prices there and be a little bit more conservative on your outlay there. But by and large, I think the biggest thing I want to point out here is in the purple shaded area there. How much can you afford to pay for some of these bred cows and heifers? And you can see that is definitely, if you're going to hold these for 8 years, you can pay a pretty handsome sum. But keep in mind, you're going to be, if you have to borrow that capital, that's at, roughly 8 to 9%. So a pretty steep cost to borrow that capital and get a return on those bred cows and heifers. So definitely it's something to keep in mind, but I just bring this up as something to consider as a tool to use that CSU Extension has developed. Pretty handy tool, I think. So let's move into some of this discussion here and kind of move through some of this and some of the expectations moving forward. On the feeder steer side of things, prices have been holding fairly steady and fairly strong here. So we're looking here at Southern Plain prices, kind of including kind of that eastern, southeastern part of Colorado. Definitely relates to a good portion of the state. But as far as price expectations moving forward, current market expectations are still seeing those around 280, potentially 290 as we get into the second half of the year. Some very strong prices. I think we have, I would argue there's probably a little bit more upside potential these prices just based on the overall supply picture. But a lot of this will be driven by corn prices as well. We're seeing pretty low corn prices, so that definitely supports the overall demand for feeder steers. On the Fed side of things, looking at the 5 market weighted average, kind of that representative price there for the market, definitely a little bit more of a muted tone here, I would argue, for Fed prices as we look through these futures prices through the rest of this year. A lot of this will hinge on just overall demand, on just over other geopolitical issues that are looming right now. So definitely a more muted tone, but I think demand is still holding strong, and I'll touch on some of that here in a minute. Box beef prices, a lot of this is still holding strong, but I think the thing we have to keep in mind from a just overall meat demand side of things, and especially beef, we kind of get into January, February, and into March here. Definitely more of the lower demand season of the year. We're in the throes of winter. People aren't outside grilling yet. And so you can see the red line there as we start to get closer to that Memorial Day timeframe. That's when we start to see a lot more of the demand pick up as we get closer to kind of the sort of unofficial start of summer and that grilling season there with Memorial Day. And so kind of looking at that as we start to get into April, is when we'll probably see this box beef price start to climb higher as retailers start to position a lot of that meat in the supply chain to be in the grocery stores for consumers heading into Memorial Day, and people are outside grilling and just enjoying the outdoors more. So as we look at this demand picture here, kind of outlaying just the overall retail prices for kind of those major meat categories. So you can see here the green line, lamb prices are definitely those higher priced meats in the meat case there at the retail store. But you look at the blue line, Beef price, we actually just had those released this morning as well, the monthly retail meat prices. And so, beef was definitely hit another record point there in February. So we're still seeing an upward trend in overall beef prices. Pork and chicken definitely trending fairly sideways. So, if you think about the consumer and the dollars that they're spending, they're seeing some pretty expensive beef in that meat case there. But more competitively priced are, kind of your pork and chicken options there. So, a lot of that kind of comes down to the consumer and what do they want to eat, what can they afford. And so, that's kind of one of those headwinds that we're looking at as we start 2025. So digging a little bit more on the beef side of things, we're seeing these prices still trend pretty high. So if you kind of think about some of those major sort of beef options that the consumer has in the meat case, those steaks are they're approaching $12. And so definitely a higher priced meal. But if you think about maybe a roast that could feed a family of four, or even ground beef, definitely lower priced options in the meat case, but still by and large trending higher. So the consumer and just the overall ability to purchase beef is definitely getting tighter. But I think the interesting thing in light of these higher retail prices, we're still seeing demand hold strong, right? So this beef demand index here. So all we're really doing as economists here, we're just kind of pulling together prices and supply, just overall supply availability, and the consumer's willingness to purchase at a given price. And actually, demand in 2024 was the strongest we've seen in over 2 decades. And keep in mind that was at a record beef price. So definitely a stronger demand than honestly I expected. So hopefully a lot of that demand continues into 2025. But I think it definitely bodes well that 2024 was as strong as it was. And so looking for that to continue that strength into 2025 here. So kind of wrapping up some of this discussion here on the beef side of things, keep in mind here, we're sitting at the lowest inventory levels that we've seen since 1951. But we're also seeing beef production that is, over 26 billion pounds. So a lot of this is just the genetic potential in these cattle being recognized. So we're seeing a lot of the decline in inventory be offset with just higher carcass weights and just overall production of beef in the U.S. here. And so that's largely see that a lot of that continuing here in 2025. But I think, this is definitely paints a picture that, the cattle industry, even though supplies are tightening, they're being very efficient with the cattle that they have in producing the beef that is demanded here in the U.S. And just kind of a bigger picture outlay here as far as just overall red meat and poultry consumption. USDA is kind of painting a picture as far as overall beef consumption and poultry consumption. Poultry is going to be that larger gainer over the next 5 to 10 years. Beef and pork will probably maintain a fairly similar margin share than what we've seen here. So definitely a lot to ponder there as far as just overall consumption moving ahead. But by and large, kind of a general upward trend, and a lot of that gain will probably go more to the poultry side of things. So wrapping this up, some of the discussions and things that we talked about here, obviously drought and pasture conditions are one of those bigger picture things that we have to consider here, just overall feed availability and feed costs. But we have some larger looming economic issues here, geopolitical issues, inflation, and trade. Didn't get into a lot of this discussion here, but I'll just bring back the interest rate discussion that I had at the beginning here. Demand held very strong here in 2024, hoping to see that continue in 2025 here. But global demand is still part of that picture. We export a good portion of our beef, and it's high valued beef. And so exchange rates are part of that too. So just some bigger things to keep in mind and watch in the coming year. So with that, wraps up my discussion here. And so thank you for the time. And Megan, I'll pass it back to you if you want to do questions now or hold off, but I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Cousins, and my apologies for mispronouncing your name. Again, Dr. Cousins is the director and agricultural economist at the Livestock Marketing Information Center. Gus or Emily, it looks like maybe we have a question.
We do have a question, and a good question, kind of looking at our current environment and things that may be on the horizon. So, Tyler, the question is, can you speak to buying or trading trends of major commodities? Examples include corn, soy, and beef by major world players. The example has demand remained strong for American beef and corn for China, etc. Also, how would tariffs, which is obviously a difficult topic to keep up with, influencing the prices of corn, soy, and beef?
So good question there. And obviously this whole tariff discussion is very fluid, is the way I'll put it. And so it's really hard to kind of pin down the sort of the exact economic impacts. But I think the larger thing we have to keep in mind when it comes to tariffs, we kind of have to think of that as a tax, and that's going to be cause inflationary pressures, is the way I'll put it. And so if we see a lot of this start to play out, I think that's the thing we have to watch. And definitely that inflationary side of things it does not support overall demand growth. And so that's going to be one of those larger looming issues that we look at there. But I think by and large, what we saw in 2024, as far as demand goes, for beef and corn, very strong. China, they're when they want to buy, they buy. But I think, as far as our major buyers go, for beef specifically, I'm thinking, South Korea, Japan, consistent buyers, steady buyers, buying high quality beef from us. I would argue those are the ones that we need to maintain. They've been long-term buyers. I mean, we're talking 20, 30 years. Those are the buyers that we need to maintain. And even our colleagues to the north and the south. I mean, those are major trading partners of ours. And so maintaining those relationships, I would argue, is key for us. Anyways, my thoughts, hopefully I answered their question, but good question.
I'm sorry I was muted. I believe that is the only question we had in the chat. So Megan, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you. All right, and I'm going to pass it on over to Cindy, the director from Archuleta County. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you to both Dr. Cousins and Dr. Bollinger. Those were great. It is my honor to introduce our third speaker. It is Hunter Doyle. Hunter, please go ahead and start sharing. Looks like you're doing that. Hunter is an agronomist with expertise in forage crop systems. He holds a master's in soil and crop sciences from Colorado State University and a bachelor's in environmental sciences from Colorado Mesa University. Hunter currently manages an extensive forage research project in Western Colorado, focusing on alternative forage crops and improved water use efficiency. He will speak on alternative forage crops in Colorado. Take it away, Hunter.
Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Hunter. Right now I work on this alternative forage in the Colorado River Basin. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the project I worked on. I'm going to talk a little bit about some other projects I've worked on, and then I'm just going to touch base on just some alternative forage species that you might be interested in or try to grow here in Colorado. So without further ado, I'll start some of that. Some background already. A lot of this was touched on, but I've done a lot of research at the CSU Research Station in Fruita, Colorado. I did my master's degree there, and I focused on intercropping alfalfa with different grass species under deficit irrigation. So I've done a lot of forage work during my agriculture career, and I'll touch base on some more of that here in just a sec. But so I just want to highlight that there are a lot of options out there, forage crops, besides your alfalfa and your typical grasses. But the biggest thing is understanding your area, your climate, understanding your fields, elevation, temperature, precipitation. That's going to be huge. What kind of water do you have? Obviously, Colorado has we have a lot of different climates where you can grow these crops. We have a lot of different water situations. Some people are in dry land, some people are limited irrigation, Some people have really good irrigation. Regardless of what your situation is, though, you're probably going to be running into water issues like we have seen across the state. There's grasses and legumes. So I'm just trying to highlight like there's cool season and warm season stuff depending on your area. Are you doing it for hay or pasture? Have you mixtures? Mixtures can be really valuable. I'll talk a little bit about mixtures here in a second. I like to highlight varieties. Certain varieties can be really well adapted to certain areas or certain situations. What kind of animals are you feeding? What's your market for your area? Do you want native plants? Do you want introduced plants? Do you want other benefits to wildlife? So there's a lot of different factors to weigh in when you're deciding what kind of forage crops to be growing at your place, and every farm's going to take a unique approach to it. I really want to highlight these resources, and I'll bring this up again later in the presentation, but I use these resources all the time. The Intermountain Grass and Legume Forage Production Manual is a really extensive manual put together by experts at CSU over many years that frankly has tons of information about any species you're thinking about growing. I like to highlight the Forage Information System from Oregon State University is a really good resource. I'll show a little example of some of their web pages, but they have tons of different information throughout that whole system. And it's a really good database of information about forages. And I like to highlight the Colorado Forage Guide, which is also a CSU extension stuff. A lot of it says small acreage management, but you can apply a lot of those to bigger acreages as well. So I think these are three really good resources if you're trying to change up your forage system or you're having issues with your forage production or anything like that. I'm gonna start off with just like some of the out forage work I did during my master's degree. We did some alfalfa grass intercropping. We did a lot of different stuff. I thought saw the most success from just planting alfalfa indiscriminately with the grass. Um, it was really helpful there. So you can do this with other legumes as well. There's vetches you can do this with, bird's foot trefoil, things like sandfoin. I specifically had tested meadow brome, orchard grass, and tall fescue. I highlighted orchard grass and tall fescue. I feel like those did the best. Why might you want to look at something like this? Well, I like to highlight this graph in the bottom right where we can see the cool season grass production is that blue line and then alfalfa production. So we can see that different times of the year, these different crops are going to do really well. And so you have two different root systems out there when you're growing a legume with the grass. Legumes have a tap root system, while grasses typically have a fibrous root system. So you can explore different soil niches. There's more efficient water soil use in that situation. You'll notice that the grasses will benefit a lot from some of that nitrogen that the legumes are fixing. What you'll notice is that in that first year, the alfalfa or whatever legume you have is probably going to dominate. And over time, grass will begin to take over. So this could be an option from having an alfalfa field that lasts 4 years that will just directly transition into a grass field that could be, so instead of replanting in 4 years with your alfalfa, you plant once and you have a field that lasts 5, 6, up to 10 years. Some of those grasses can last a long time, especially if you manage them properly. So that's just a little work I did during my master's degree. I wanted to talk about and highlight some options for people. I'm going to move into this other project I work on. We're looking at two specific crops. We're looking at sandfoin and then these specific varieties of intermediate wheatgrass and how they perform in three really distinct growing regimes in Western Colorado. So we have field plots up in Steamboat and Kremling where I would consider that like a high mountain meadow, really cold, short growing season. We have plots down where I live in Grand Junction, really warm, long growing season. Then we have some stuff down in the Cortez area, which is kind of an in between high elevation, desert plateau, still some hot temperatures and stuff. So specifically, we focus on two different crops. When we talk about this sandfoin, I think it could be a nice forage crop for a lot of people. It's a perennial cool season legume. Alfalfa is a cool season legume. Most legumes are cool season. Most of your clovers are the same way. So obviously it fixes nitrogen, which can be a really big benefit. It's a really high quality forage crop. It's very palatable. Livestock love it. Unfortunately, the elk love it too, so you might have a problem with that. Has been an issue, but yeah, the wildlife really love it too. It goes to maturity really early in spring, typically earlier than a lot of your other crops. What's nice about it, it's really deep rooted. Like I said, we're growing it in a lot of different regions. It's cold resistant. It does well up in our mountain meadows, but it's also heat and drought resistant. It does well down in the valley where I'm at. And that's the biggest thing is the adaptability of this crop. Does good in most soil textures. Typically, you want to be well drained, but I've seen it grow in some more clay-like soil textures. pH needs to be above 6. That's the big thing. Typically, that's not an issue in Colorado. It's very deep rooted, just a little bit more. You have a wider range to harvest it, so you can harvest it from mid to full bloom. That can benefit a lot of pollinator species. The bees really love it. Stems are hollow, they remain succulent, so the maturity doesn't decrease the quality so much as with other ones. And a lot of these traits are only going to be improved as we continue to breed more cultivars and stuff. The biggest thing I like to highlight is it's a non-bloating legume, which is really beneficial. It has tannins that binds to the proteins in the rumen that reduces any bloat risk. So you can graze it, you can graze it, you can hay it, you can put it out in your pasture. And it's very lush as well. So that's one nice thing about the sandpoint. And then I'll share, this is just some results we got. This is in Fruta. We did a variety trial. You can see the sandpoint really yielded really well on this first cutting. I think these plots were a little water stressed out too, and you really couldn't tell the sandpoint. The alfalfa was a little low because of the water stuff. But what was nice about this sandpoint, it was ready to harvest two weeks before the alfalfa was. So in a situation where you might have limited irrigation or you're trying to really bounce off of that winter moisture and stuff, this sandpoint does really good on that first cutting and can really take advantage. And it comes up a lot quicker, which is really nice. And you can see it still has really high protein, 18, 19, 20%. When you look at total digestible nutrients, everything's above 62%, which would be considered supreme quality by the USDA. Relative feed values kind of around the range. You could probably get a higher relative feed value if you cut it earlier as well. This is our second cutting of sandfoin. As you can see, it still did pretty well compared to our alfalfa control. The quality was a little lower in this second cutting. That was probably a combination of some drought stress, and then we just got in there late. We had a lot of different situations. I probably would have liked to harvest this about a week earlier. But as you can see, that's just some results from our research. Sorry, I'm going quick. I just have a lot of slides I'm trying to get to. Here's the third cutting all over the board. You can tell that, yeah, our alfalfa was probably water stressed since we only got 1.5 tons to the acre, but still it performs pretty well. We got 3 cuts out of it in Fruta in 2024, so we'll see what we can get in 2025. I'm going to jump over to intermediate wheatgrass is another crop we work with. At the Land Institute, who I work for, we have kerns of varieties of intermediate wheatgrass that are more focused on grain production, but they can also be used as forage production crops. Intermediate wheatgrass is a really common crop. It's a perennial grass. It's long lived, cool season. It's got short rhizomes, so it can creep over time. Forage production, seed production, and conservation programs are all uses for this one. What I like, and I'm trying to highlight some of these species, they're well adapted with different climates they can grow in, a wide range of soil conditions, and in somewhat limited irrigation. Obviously with the grass, your best production being spring and fall, but since we have such a varied climates throughout Colorado, and typically we have limited water, I'm trying to highlight those species that might be well adapted to all our different climates and specifically our limited water. One thing I want to highlight is, I'm talking minimum water here, but a lot of these crops will respond really well when you do have a good year of water. Obviously, we can have some variable years. A few years ago, we had some really good snow, and a lot more runoff. And then this year, it's not looking so good. So having a crop that, all right, it can survive on limited water, but when I do have that extra water, it's going to respond as well. That's kind of an important thing I like, and that's part of the adaptability of some of these crops. Here's just my variety trial in Fruta. I don't these were a little stressed out, so they didn't do as good as the alfalfa. As far as a grass goes, anything above 13% crude protein is considered supreme quality. That's really high. Cold digestible nutrients all above 65, 66%. I'm really happy with that. So the quality of these are really nice, especially on that first cut. This is from Southwest Colorado. So this is in Cortez area. Same thing. We're going to focus on these purple ones down at the bottom. You can tell these are our sandpoint ones. Our alfalfa got 1.8 tons an acre. Our kerns did really well down in this area where it's a little bit cooler, not as hot as the Grand Valley where I live. And here's like a graph of those same numbers, but just showing that it's adaptable. In some areas, it's might get out competed by typical stuff grown there like alfalfa in some areas and might do just as well. So definitely something you might consider. We also planted some up in Kremling. We didn't get to harvest it, but the field was establishing really nicely up there. We had some issues with it in Steamboat when I was working there with Todd. But the Kerns is definitely, when I say Kerns, it's just intermediate wheatgrass. It's definitely a wide adapted plant that could be good for some forage stuff. And those are the two crops that we're specifically researching on my forage project right now. I'm going to jump into some other forage crops that I've heard some hype about. Some stuff I like to see. Endophyte free, novel endophyte tall fescue. Tall fescue is a really cool crop. Again, the thing I like to highlight is it's just really well adapted. I've seen tall fescue survive down here in the valley where I live. I've seen it up in the mountains. It can survive in anything from a sandy to a clay soil type, big elevation, wide range of pHs. It can tolerate moderate salinity. 12 inches of precipitation is the minimum. But that being said, like if you put more water on it, it should respond well. This is from Oregon State University, just some numbers I pulled out of the forage system. They're getting 6 to 7 tons per acre. When they cut it at the early vegetation stage, they're getting over 20% crude protein and 73% total digestible nutrients. When they cut it at mid bloom, 16 and a half crude protein, 60% total digestible nutrients. So this could be an option. It's really well adapted. Like I said, I used it in my research when we grew it with alfalfa, and it did really well in that situation too. Tall fescue has traditionally had an endophyte in it, which can be really negative for any livestock. So you got to make sure you get an endophyte free or a novel endophyte in that tall fescue. But that being said, I have some of the cultivars here that you can list. There's quite a few different ones. The endophyte can cause a wide range of issues, and it's transmitted by seed. So just ensure you get good certified seed from any of the typical seed producers, and you'll be there. This top list of cultivars are going to be endophyte free varieties, so like Forager and Fuego, Mozark, and then that bottom one's going to be more of your novel endophyte varieties. But this could be a pasture or a hay crop. The only downside to the tall fescue is the palatability can be fair to poor. So that's the one thing is it's not as palatable. Try to get in there earlier, be more high quality, stuff like that. Your best production is going to be in the spring and the fall. I'm going to touch on just some Utah sweet vetch. This has been a really common one I've heard a lot of people doing research on and seems to be gaining some traction. There's a ton of different vetches that we use in forage. There's Sicer milk vetch, there's hairy vetch, common vetch. It's a legume, so it fixes nitrogen. It's got a really beautiful pink flower. It kind of looks like sandfoin. Wide range of adaptation, 4,000 to 8,000 feet in elevation, 10 to 18 inches precipitation. So I know some people like this for range or their pastures. It's also bloat free like the sandfoin. Wide range of soils it can do well in. So definitely a few different benefits from this one. They're still coming out with a lot of new cultivars. Seed availability can be a little bit of an issue, but this could be used in your hay or pasture. I wish I had some more quality or yield numbers on this one. It's probably the most obscure. They're still doing a lot of research with it, but I have seen fields of this out there. And I have seen test plots of this out when I'm out in Western Colorado looking around. I'm going to jump over to bird's foot trefoil. This is a perennial cool season legume. Really winter hardy, can survive a wide range of pH. I've seen people growing this down in Montrose. I've seen it intercropped with different grasses and stuff like that. I've seen it specifically intercropped with like some of our intermediate wheatgrass, and it's been pretty successful there. There's different varieties. There's like erect varieties of Samtol. There's some that lay out flat. So depending on your system, if you're going to do a pasture or if you're going to do haying, you might want to figure out what variety is going to work best for you. You can do well in some waterlogged soils, also in well-drained soils. It's bloat-free. It's really highly palatable, and then can do good in limited water, but it will respond to more water as well. Like I said, it can do good in mixtures too. High forage quality. 60 to 80% of your yield of alfalfa, so it doesn't yield as much of alfalfa, but the forage quality is there. The total digestible nutrients at bud stage 65.8%, and at 10% bloom it's 62.6. So it's not going to drop off in quality as much as some of your stuff like alfalfa as well. I'd like to share this. This is just a table of performance of heifers who were eating alfalfa, who were grazing alfalfa and bird's foot trefoil. And this is year one, year two, average gain per day. The bird's foot trefoil was seeing a larger average gain per day. pounds per day, and same with their heifer production, except for in year two. So year one, they saw a pretty good increase. Year two, it was a little less than the alfalfa, but overall, it was doing really well. So these are really high quality crops. You might want to look at some of these options depending on your situation. Here's a non-exhaustive list of potential other forage species. There are a lot of grasses. If you see WG, that's a wheatgrass. There's a lot of different wheatgrasses. There's introduced grasses, there's native grasses, both have pluses and minuses. Some of these are hybrids. Some of them are really tolerant to salts. I run into a lot of salt issues. So don't think that you're stuck with just what other people grow in the area. There are tons and tons of different species to explore and stuff that might work well in your system. And that's a good way, that's a good reason to go consult one of your local extension agents and see what they think and say, hey, I want to try some alternatives. Let's try to figure this out. There's also a ton of clovers. That's like 8 different clovers right there. Cowpeas, we have different vetches, falcata, I think that's how you say it. That's like a yellow flowered alfalfa that's definitely been gaining a lot of traction recently. You have some annuals like fava bean and peas. Small Burnett is technically a sunflower, but it's also could be a forage crop that does well with grazing and stuff like that. And there's tons of forbs, so just don't feel like you're stuck with what other people are growing. There are a lot of different options out there, and everyone's farm system's different, and something might work really good for you and it might not work well for your neighbor, or you might be in a situation where some of these crops are ideal for your situation, but not for someone down valley. So who knows? But it's good to kind of assess and see what kind of stuff might work for you. I'm going to highlight these resources again. I know it's weird that I'm leaving this Oregon State on there. And what you need to know is Oregon is really similar climate wise to Colorado. They have high mountains, they have deserts. Eastern Oregon's a desert. It's just like where I live in Grand Junction. So they have a lot of really good information in there. This is the manual. You can find this online. Just Google Intermountain Grass and Legume Forage Production Manual. You'll find it. That's in Colorado, believe it or not. And then same thing with this Colorado Forage Guide. It's just it really runs through the species. There's some really good charts on there that talk about soil conditions and which crop's going to work best for what soil conditions you have out there. So just wanted to highlight those again. This is just a quick screenshot I took from the Forage Information System from OSU. This is on orchard grass. I mean, you can go through each one of these little tabs, identifying characteristics. It'll pull up maps. It'll show you where this crop's going to grow best and where it's not. Climate, soil suitability zones. So, like, really good information in depth. It's not going to be this in depth for every species on the system, but for a lot of them, it is awesome. Really good stuff there. Thank you. Happy to look at any questions or whatnot. So hope I didn't go too quick. I had a lot to share. Wish I had more time, but thanks.
Thank you so much, Hunter. Great information. Appreciate it. I think we had a couple questions pop up, Gus.
We do. Let's see. The question that came up in the chat, Hunter, is referring to sainfoin. And when's the best timing for planting sainfoin? And is it too late to seed for this coming growing season?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say you can plant in fall or spring with the sainfoin. I mean, if you're going to plant in the spring, I mean, if you're going to plant it this year, I'd get it in quick. I would more or less likely say if you're trying to decide right now, I would probably get your field ready and plant in the fall. Put the tough part with the sainfoin is it takes a little bit of time to establish. So that first year can be a little tough. So if you plant it in the fall, you mow once or twice if you have some quick growing annuals out there. It will come up quick in the spring, and hopefully you can start to do more soil coverage and be more competitive then. Otherwise, that when we planted in the spring, we just had a lot of weed issues that first year. Not that we weren't able to overcome it, but I think fall is probably the best idea and setting yourself up, setting your field up. I think any proper pest management plan starts before you plant that crop. So I have some more information I'm willing to share about sainfoin and intermediate wheatgrass production. If you,
Awesome.
I can share my email in the chat. Oh, I guess I should probably mention this project. The sainfoin and intermediate wheatgrass projects kind of at a pause right now because of federal funding and X, Y, and Z. So unfortunately, I found a new job and I'm moving out of Colorado. But I'm totally happy. If you have my email, I'll give you my personal email or my cell phone. If you want to grow sainfoin or intermediate wheatgrass, like please just reach out and I'm happy to talk about it. Even though I won't be around, I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, first off, we're certainly going to miss you and have you as a local resource to us. But we do have one more question that came up in the chat, and it's a very good question. The question is, what are the differences in time to establishment for alfalfa compared to sweet vetch, trefoil, sandfoin, or falcata, and the more commonly planted orchard, meadow brome, tall fescue? How is that all compared to intermediate wheat?
Yeah, and so definitely probably going to be the biggest issue is establishment. I'm going to say sweet vetch, trefoil, sandfoin, they can take a bit to establish. That's why I recommend fall, letting them come up a little bit. You can do it in the spring, but you're gonna have to go out there and mow and maybe do some herbicides. So it definitely can take a little bit more time. We planted we planted some sandfoin in fall, and we got 2 cuttings and a grazing off of it the following season. Versus if you planted in like the spring, I would be surprised if you could push for 2 cuttings, maybe 1 cutting. Um, into grazing. So it definitely establishes a little low later. Orchard, orchard can come up pretty quick. Tall fescue can come up pretty quick. Our intermediate wheatgrass, we've seen a lot of different results. I think it's also can take some time to establish most of these perennials. So I would definitely say be prepared. Don't go in there thinking it's gonna be planting alfalfa or like orchard grass. Like do your reading, get a pest management plan in practice, and just be prepared to do like a mowing or two to try to knock back some weeds. I think that has been the most successful for us. You can do herbicide, but it's a little more costly than just mowing, and knocking back those weeds really allows those crops to come up. And then by the second year, once they're established, they should be good about closing canopy pretty quickly and competing pretty well, especially at the beginning of the year.
Okay. Any other questions, Gus? I think that does it. Questions?
I think that does it. Thank you again,
Okay.
Hunter.
Hunter, a lot
Yeah,
of
no
people
worries,
have
thanks.
said best of luck. We will miss you and just
I
good luck with
appreciate it.
everything in your
This
future.
is gonna sound bad because I just put in I'm working for Oregon State, so I'm not biased when I'm sharing the Forage information system. But I
Good
am going to be working
information.
for Oregon State in Extension, so I'm going to be doing the same stuff, just in a different location.
Well, very good. Oregon State has some great info. Thank you, Hunter.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
I am thrilled to introduce our final speaker, Dr. Kathy Whitman. Dr. Whitman, please go ahead and start sharing your slides while I introduce you. Kathy received her MS in Ruminant Nutrition and DVM from Colorado State University. She completed a field services internship at the University of Georgia and later became an ABVP diplomat specializing in beef cattle practice. Dr. Whitman was in private practice in both Utah and Colorado and was an assistant professor with the University of Nebraska at the Great Plains Veterinary Educational Center. In her new role at Colorado State University, Kathy will participate in a wide variety of activities, working as a liaison between the university and extension, producers, and veterinarians in Colorado. She's recently been involved in HPAI research, emergency management and preparedness, BQA training, Colorado County Health Fair checks, student teaching and extension consultation. Engaging with stakeholders within the state of Colorado is a primary goal for Kathy, so she encourages you to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. Today, she will present on spring nutrition considerations for livestock. Thank you, Dr. Whitman.
Thank you very much, Cindy, and thank you all for having me today. Right now in my current role as the veterinary extension specialist, I get a lot of chicken questions. So I'm really excited to talk about my passion in nutrition. And so today we're going to go through and speak about vitamin A, more specifically, a nutrition talk in this amount of time needs to be a little more of a slice of my interests. And so we'll focus today on vitamin A in our cow herd, particularly as we get into calving season. So today we're going to go through the sources of vitamin A, what our cows require during the year. If we have cows that are deficient or insufficient in vitamin A, what factors influence that state of being, and then what impact do those deficiencies have? When we see these deficiencies in our cattle, what sort of treatments can we do in the immediate term, and then more importantly, how do we avoid getting into these situations to begin with? So first, we'll start out. Where does this cow get vitamin A? And we'll talk a little bit more specifically here in a bit about the levels of vitamin A that we get in our forages, but certainly growing green forages are going to be the primary source of vitamin A, and there's tons of it in there. So when we look at our cows on our spring and summer pastures, they don't need any vitamin A supplementation if they're on those growing fields. Now, when we get into situations that we'll talk a little more specifically about, but times when we maybe don't have that forage available, oral supplementation through either a vitamin and mineral mix or lick tub, or some sort of oral supplement in the form of feed might be the way that we need to get some of that vitamin A into them in certain times a year. And then when we get into more serious situations, we can talk about doing injectable vitamin A and E, when we're really having deficiency issues and we need to address the problem pretty quickly. So I'm happy when a person that's an expert in forage presents previous to me, and my slides don't look a whole lot different than what they present. It makes me think that maybe I do know what I'm talking about. So this is just an example of when we're going to get that grass growth throughout the year, and this is going to adjust depending on what part of the country you're in, what part of the state you're in. But really, we get those cool season grasses that are going to start to come up about this time of year, and at least where I'm at and where my cows are at, we're starting to see some of that green come on with this past bit of snow that we had. So now is the time of year when we start to see that fresh forage start to grow, and we're going to get a source of vitamin A, and we'll continue that through our warm season grasses that come up in the middle of the summer. And then hopefully, if everything works out well, we'll get a bump in cool season grasses in the fall. There may be times when this doesn't happen and this picture isn't quite so perfect, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. Now I'm going to emphasize this time of year. So most of you that have cattle that are listening to this program are probably have cows right now that are in their third trimester, and this is really a critical time of year to make sure that she gets the vitamin A that she needs. And this is primarily because obviously this is a time of significant calf growth, and then also her colostrum formation. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that there's minimal transfer of vitamin A across that placenta when that calf is in her uterus, and so making sure that cow is sufficient in vitamin A, the minimal amount that we get, we want to make sure we get to that calf, but more importantly, we want to make sure that she's able to deposit that vitamin A into her colostrum. And so again, in the third trimester, it's really critical to make sure our vitamin A levels are adequate. So when we look at what cows require, now I'm really just putting on here pregnant and lactating cows, because during most of the rest of the year we have some access to forages that will have some vitamin A, and so this is really a critical time of year. It's the time of the year that we're in right now, and we can see and I put this up here in terms of pounds of feed intake, because that's going to vary, of course, according to your cow size. And so for a pregnant cow, we're looking at about 1,300 international units of vitamin A per pound of feed intake. Lactating is a little bit higher. And then just for reference, this is sort of the recommendation when we're supplementing these cows when they don't have green forage available. It's about 30,000 to 100,000 international units a day. So you can kind of keep that number, that wide range in your mind. If you're trying to determine are your levels adequate. And so I just did a little quick calculation here, and I put this 1,500-pound cow at 2.5% of her body weight intake, and that's going to vary obviously depending on her stage of production. But if we estimate that she takes in 35.5 pounds of feed a day, then her requirements are going to be just under 49,000 international units a day if she's pregnant, and about 67,500 when she's lactating. So that kind of gives you an estimate of what your target is, particularly when you're supplementing. Are you feeding enough? One thing I put on here too is that cattle have typically 2 to 4 months of liver storage of vitamin A. So when they're on these green growing forages in the summertime and in the fall, then they can get some of that liver stored up and they can last some period of time. But as we'll discuss here in a little bit, when we have restrictions on that green forage, then our storage is less, and so our supplementation requirements are even more critical. Here's this is from a paper out of I think the Journal of Animal Science. Just some examples of vitamin A content in these feeds, and in this paper they used fescue as their fresh forage, and maybe your forage is going to be different depending on your rangeland. But the point of putting that up there is just to show that, a pound of dry matter of fresh forage is over 18,000 international units per pound. And so you can imagine that a cow grazing on spring and summer pasture, she's going to easily achieve her levels, her requirements for vitamin A, and significantly more so. So this gives her the opportunity to store some of that excess vitamin A that she's consuming. When we look at other feed supplements that we're going to be that we may be giving these cows, corn silage, you certainly can feed enough to get her levels of vitamin A. It's just a matter of how much do you want to feed. When we talk about whole shelled corn, you can see that it's pretty low. So we're going to have a hard time meeting her vitamin A requirement if we're using corn as our energy supplement in wintertime. I'll skip down to the hay. This was the average hay in the paper, and this was the average of alfalfa, orchard grass, and fescue. And really, it's pretty low compared to your fresh forages. It's around less than 10% really. So when we rely on hay in the wintertime to supply that vitamin A, we might be coming up short. So that's something just to consider. If we go back to the slide before, we can see that the pregnant cow here that needs 1,300 units per pound of feed intake, that hay in this paper would just cover that requirement for that cow if she consumes enough. I also put in here some cow cake. This is the range cake that we feed our cows, and we're not feeding it for vitamin A specifically. It's a protein supplement, but certainly it has some vitamin A in there that will help us cover our cows during the winter time. And then a vitamin and mineral lick tub is the supplement here that I have. And notice that it has 150,000 units per pound, and that's great. That's going to cover this cow, if she consumes that much, right? And we really don't want our cows consuming a pound of lick tub a day. So, if we go back down to about the 4 ounces that we expect that she's going to consume, then we're not quite meeting our vitamin A requirements. So just some things to consider when you're looking at some of these feed labels. Now, I've mentioned these, I've dropped some hints about this previously in the discussion, but really when we look at vitamin A deficiency in our cow herds, the primary causes are listed here, and really we want to look at forage quality, and forage quality meaning your pasture, your rangeland, whatever those cows are grazing on during the spring, summer, and fall. And so anytime these forages are impacted by drought, that's going to shorten our season. That's going to blunt the growth of those forages, and that cow's ability to store some of that vitamin A is going to be limited. This season, so as we get further into the season, our vitamin A levels are going to be decreasing. So certainly we can have that sort of issue going on in these cows. We look at hay quality and the age of the hay. That's really the critical factor for us when we're talking about hay that we're feeding in the wintertime. So as hay gets older, and this paper that I just previously showed you with the vitamin A content also demonstrated that as hay gets older, it's going to lose the vitamin A content as well as other fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin E and D. Now, when we talk about harvesting hay and the TDN and protein that we get when we feed that hay, those things really aren't going to change. But if we're talking about harvesting hay in July that we're going to feed in February, we lose a significant amount of that vitamin A content and those fat-soluble vitamins. And so really when we're looking at our feed analysis, and we'll mention this, when we should do that, we need to consider the age of that hay when we're actually feeding it. If we have nutrient chelators within those forages, within those harvested forages, such as high nitrates, those can also bind up some of our vitamins. And then intake is pretty critical. So in that demonstration, in that example that I had, we had 2.5% feed intake, and that's impacted, of course, by the level of protein that we have in that feed and the level of TDN that we have in that feed. And so if we're not feeding a high quality hay to these cows during the third trimester and into lactation, then they're simply not going to be able to consume enough feed to not only not supply their protein and energy requirements, but also you're going to be missing out on even more vitamin A. So we'll get into some more veterinary related stuff now, some of the stuff that I might see as a veterinarian when we're dealing with deficiencies. And really when we have deficiencies in our cows, the first place we're probably going to see that is in the calves. And so calves that are born to vitamin A deficient cows can certainly be born weak, or they can die shortly after birth. They can have some eye issues, some small eyeballs or cataracts, and those would be pretty significant sort of issues. If we have a cow that's deficient, but maybe not so deficient that we're negatively impacting that calf when they're born, certainly they can have an impact on their colostrum quality. And so not getting enough vitamin A into that colostrum, that's that first source for that calf when they're born, can lead to just some health issues along the way, diarrhea being one of those, probably due to some immune dysfunction, and then continued poor performance of that calf. This is even more critical if we have a calf that has failure of passive transfer, so a calf that didn't get adequate colostrum. Again, if a calf has failure of passive transfer, you need to consider too that they may have a vitamin A deficiency, simply because that's really their primary source when they're first born. When we talk about cows and what their more clinical issues, so these are things that would be obvious that you would see. If you've seen a cow with vitamin A deficiency, she looks ill-thrift, she has a poor hair coat, not doing really well. You may have some abortions or retained membranes. And this is going to be in a group of cows, not on an individual animal basis. So keep that in mind. If you're dealing with a vitamin A deficiency in your herd, you're going to have more retained placentas than what you would routinely expect. We don't see that a lot in beef cattle, and so if you're seeing several of those, you might want to consider vitamin A in your list of potential causes. And there's a lot of things that can cause all three of these, but certainly vitamin A needs to be considered. Now, the more insidious issue that we get in our cows is the ones that we are really sort of subclinical and don't have real obvious signs. So we may see poor reproductive performance and decreased immune function. And these can, of course, be caused by several things, but certainly if we're struggling to figure out, why we're having some of these issues, why these cows aren't breeding back, why we're having some more disease than we would normally expect, despite the fact that we have a good vaccination program, may want to have some nutritional considerations and include vitamin A on that list. So if we think that we possibly have some sort of nutritional issue going on in the herd, and vitamin A being one of those things, there's some things that we can do to diagnose that and try and figure that out. And I have this at the bottom of the list here, but really it should be at the top, and that's feed analysis. So looking at that hay that we're supplementing those cows with during the wintertime, does it have the amount of vitamin A that we thought it had in it, or other nutrients that we think should be in it? So really, when we're doing this feed analysis, I recommend testing this forage at or near the time that you're actually feeding it. Like I said, your primary nutritional balancers of protein, energy, calcium, and phosphorus are probably not going to change from that first time that you tested back in the summer or the fall. But certainly those fat-soluble vitamins, A and E especially, can be nearly depleted by the time you feed this hay. So testing near the time of feeding is going to be important for getting accurate values of what those cows are actually have a chance to consume. And then consider all the supplements that you are giving or aren't giving. What sort of levels are these cows intaking? Are they truly eating the mineral like we expect that they should be? And if they're not, is that a reason for having some of these issues? From there, you can look at blood, and this is kind of a quick and dirty way to assess several levels of vitamins and minerals. And so you can certainly use this for vitamin A and E levels. And I keep mentioning vitamin E because usually if you have a vitamin A issue and it's related to your forage quality, then vitamin E may also be an issue. So you certainly can look at these values. If it's low in the blood, then it's certainly going to be low in the cow. The liver, like I said, is the place where we're going to store vitamin A. And if it's low in the blood, then the liver has no more vitamin A to put into that blood. So if it's low in the blood, then it's certainly low in the cow. Now, if the blood levels are normal, that does not rule out the fact that you may actually have a deficiency. The liver is going to do all it can to maintain those normal blood levels. And so if the blood is normal again, it still doesn't rule out that you have a deficiency. What's more accurate is liver biopsies. And so if you have weak or dead calves, certainly you want to get those necropsied and sampled and include the fetal liver to do some nutrient testing to test for vitamin A in particular. You can do cow liver biopsies if you're really having a problem, and we've ruled out everything else. Pretty significant time and energy and cost investment, but certainly you can do these liver biopsies, and that's going to be the most sensitive, not only for vitamin A but also things like selenium and copper. If we have an issue with vitamin A, or we feel like the chances are pretty good based on some of our previous history, if we've had drought, if our hay quality wasn't as good as we expected, if we find that our levels of vitamin A in the hay we've been using isn't quite adequate, and we're having some sick calves, certainly we can use injectable vitamin A, and I have some doses on here for you for use in the field. So it's pretty difficult to overdose an animal with vitamin A and E. So, if you feel like you're suspecting it, don't be worried that you're going to give them an injection and then it's going to subsequently lead to a toxicity. That's different for things like selenium if you don't confirm that. But in the case of vitamin A, you don't run that risk. When you're talking about the cows and you've really had a hard summer, you've had some drought, your hay quality isn't that good, and you think, yeah, I want to supplement them with some vitamin A, the timing of that can be pretty important. So really, if you're going to select a time, I like to do it around the 5 weeks before calving, simply because that's when they're going to deposit all of the nutrients into that colostrum. That's when they start colostrum formation. And so giving them that vitamin A injection at that time can be pretty valuable. Now, if you need to do this over repeated times, it's going to take some time before they're going to get to green grass and get their liver stores refilled. You may need to repeat this on a monthly basis if you know that you're struggling with vitamin A deficiency. Now I will put this caution out there. I said that you can't overdose these cows with vitamin A, but certainly there have been reports of adverse reactions to vitamin A when you're giving it in conjunction with vaccines. And so if we think that we want to give our scour vaccine 5 to 6 weeks before calving, and we want to go ahead and do the vitamin A at that time, that's usually when I recommend it. And I've never had any issues with it, but certainly there are reports out there that there can be some reactions to that. And so just a word of caution, if you think that you want to do that, that something like that is potentially possible. Now, the more important thing, what I really want to do, let me go back to this slide here. What I'd like to do as a veterinarian is I would like to avoid this slide. I would like to not have to supplement any vitamin A, and the way that we avoid doing that is, of course, through So feed and forage testing is meant of vitamin A and other nutrient deficiencies in these cows as they get into calving. And so we want to make sure that we're clear on that, that these cows have the chance to thrive based on what we're feeding them. When we look at our vitamin and mineral program, does it have vitamin A and these other nutrients in it, and are they consuming enough of it? Is it available to them? Those sorts of things. And then appropriate timing of supplementation. So when we think that we might need to instill some supplementation, these would be target times of the year, when we know we've had drought and drought stress forages, high stress times a year, especially for calves, and then of course in the wintertime when these cows don't have access to those forages. Just some final thoughts as I wrap this rapid discussion up. Vitamin A is a critical nutrient, and I don't want to make it sound like it's the only important nutrient, but certainly if you manage vitamin A, it's one of them that's pretty unstable in our harvested forages, and so if we manage that, then we'll probably get a lot of other things correct. I don't think that you need to supplement year round, especially if these cows have forage in the summer, in the spring and summer, right? So once they get on those fresh green growing forages, they're going to have plenty of vitamin A to consume, and plenty of vitamin A to store. And so if we can time our supplementation based on the fact that we expect they'll run out of vitamin A, after they take their last bite of green forage in about 3 months, then maybe we can do this a little more cost effectively, not have those lick tubs out year round, or not need to be supplementing them with some sort of feed stuff that has more vitamin A in it. I'll emphasize this because I always emphasize this in my nutrition talks, in that your supplement program. So these supplements that you put out in the wintertime, to try to combat some of these issues, are only good as your four balancers, and I mean your protein, energy, calcium, and phosphorus. And so you need to balance for those things first. Otherwise, your supplement program, isn't going to be effective. If these cows are deficient in protein or deficient in TDN, then they simply they're not going to perform as well, regardless of how high quality your supplement is. Always stress testing your feed, knowing what's in your feed, and then I've really focused on vitamin A today and the things that go wrong in vitamin A deficiency, but we always got to keep in mind that there's other things that can be going on, and we don't want to target one specific problem when we have these issues that come up, but keep in mind that we need to make sure that we have healthy cows otherwise, and that we're not dealing with any other issues. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and Gus can read them back to me, or you can email me. My email is right on here, and you can contact me with any questions or more details that you may need based on this discussion.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Whitman. And we do have lots of questions.
Good.
We do. And so the first question, and Kathy, I think this question was asked during the slide titled Cause of Deficiency, or possibly referring to the previous slide. And that question was, which brand of supplement did you measure this off of?
Yeah, so these are supplements that we use in our cows, and so I just pulled them off the labels that I had. So the cow cake was the Hubbard Range Cubes, and the supplement was the Purina Wind and Rain. It's the lick tub, the Avela4 lick tub. So, and really I don't use those. I want to emphasize that I'm not buying those tubs for just vitamin A, but I want to make sure that if I'm going to put out a mineral and vitamin supplement, that it's got that in there. And then, particularly if my hay is going to be, when I'm getting, we just put a bale out this past weekend, and that was harvested, last July. So I know that vitamin A is going to be depleted in that hay, and so I want to make sure that I'm getting those cows all the advantages I can give them, particularly right before calving.
Awesome. And our next question, let's see, is a participant was saying that he can't find that product on their website. But the question is, does Multimin 90 provide any vitamin A benefit?
Yeah, so it does not have any vitamin A in that product, and so that's selenium, copper, manganese, and zinc are the four nutrients in there. Could it be could it be helpful in vitamin A absorption? I can't speak to that, so I don't know if it would be advantageous or not. I really try very hard to emphasize using oral supplementation, using feedstuffs to get your vitamins and minerals in, just because the you know the stress of injecting and getting those cattle put through, if we can feed it, I think it's a better option. But certainly if you know that you're deficient in those nutrients, then we need to use them. But yeah, sometimes the A&E is difficult to find. I just looked not too long ago and could find a source, but that can be pretty difficult too, is if we're not getting if we don't have those resources available. The vitamin A and E, when you do buy it, it comes in a dark bottle, but if it at all gets any heat exposure, those vitamins can oxidize pretty quickly. And so, you really probably need a fresh bottle every season if you're dealing at all with these sort of issues.
Terrific. And it looks like those were the questions in the chat. And yeah, so once again, Dr. Whitman, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for having me. Appreciate your attention.
All right, thank you. And handing it over to Todd.
Thank you all. We appreciate all of our speakers today. I want to bring your attention to the screen now. Note that this is our ABM website. Many of you found out about this webinar on the ABM website. That's abm.extension.colostate.edu. That is our ag business management folks. Note that over here under education and resources, you can drop down and look at the full resource index, which includes everything that the ABM team has on there for risk, whether that's marketing risk, financial risk, or production risk, legal and human risk, and general risk included. And that includes where the enterprise budgets are that Dr. Cousins was referring to. So look at that. And as Retta put in the chat, we have more programs upcoming, not on the ABM website, but another site you need to know about is our range management extension.colostate.edu website. You can look there and see that we have grazing management and changing world coming up here in 2 short weeks. Register now. That is also in the chat. And so I want to make sure you take advantage of that opportunity because Annie Overland, who is our range management specialist on the Eastern Plains, and our very own Retta Brugger will be hosting that. Many thanks, especially today, to Megan, Cindy, and Gus for helping manage our speakers and the chat. And a huge thanks to Retta Brugger, who has managed all this behind the scenes. Don't forget to take the evaluation. It's in the chat, but I'll throw it in there again real quick so it pops up again. Please take our evaluation so we can always make this better for you in the future. And we want to thank you for joining us today and for watching us again. If you watch the recorded version or if you're watching it now, take care, everyone. Happy spring and good luck calving and with your range and pasture conditions this coming summer.